611. There are a lot of constraints with the connection, and they're all fairly complicated. You know, they occur along state roads. They include a bridge. There's obstacles in a way like street lighting and you know, electric lines. And so we just wanted to get a good solid look at it, especially because when you do a study, a lot of times you can get implementation money following the study. So we went through a public process to onboard what was then McTish Kunkel, who is now CDR McGuire. And they then partnered with NTM, who did a really complex hydraulic study of the Lehigh River, which involved several meetings with FEMA and DEP. And they did a real good job. And the reason for that portion of it was that the report looks at several options. It looks at existing conditions. How can we improve things on the short range? And then in the end, would it be possible to build a new span across the Lehigh River to accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists? You know, that's never an easy job to undertake when you start talking about bridges across the river, because they have to be clear spanned. But that's what that study did, and it did show that it can be feasibly built. It's just a matter of what that costs and the level of effort for that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Christine Troxel from CDR McGuire. She was the project manager for the study.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you,
Dave
Christine.
Stole my thunder a little bit, but as you mentioned, we're here to our study focused on the intersection or the connection between the DNL Trail, the Two Rivers Trailway, and what some of you may not know is that it's also designated as the 911 National Memorial Trail through the city. The project area you see on your screen essentially shows the mapping from the National 911 trail, and it basically shows that the on-road sections are in red. There is no direct bicycle. I'm sorry. There is no direct bicycle pedestrian connection from the downtown to the DNL Trail. And we've also understand the trail use has increased and the trend is expected to rise. The goal is to come forth with recommendations to improve the access between the Two Rivers and the DNL Trail. This isn't the first study that was done for this connection. In the past, Lehigh Valley Planning Commission and LVTS produced the Walk Roll LV Active Transportation Plan. 2 of the 8 priority connections in that study are the connections between the DNL and the Two Rivers Trailway. Additionally, the Delaware Canal Workbook also studied and envisioned a connection here to improve safety. That study looked at it as a potential bridge being an iconic green structure for the city of Easton, and you can see those were some of the concepts in that study. As part of our work, we completed a public survey. There were 95 responses. 94 of those were respondents from the Northampton County, and these are just some of the highlights from that survey. 46% of the people using the trails would bike to them. 60% would use them weekly. And the overwhelming response that was received as part of that survey is that the area is very dangerous to navigate, as you might all be aware. It is congested with vehicular traffic, the guide signage is non-existent, and sidewalks do not currently support two-way traffic. Bicyclists who use the trail responded that they often need to dismount their bikes and walk them through the area, and that there are blind spots and speeding vehicles that make the area very unsafe. These were some of the items that people indicated would be important to them as part of a trail connection, and the number 1 item there, the most popular, was directional signage. As Dave mentioned, we looked at 4 different options for improving that connection between the 2 trails. The first one meaning the existing condition, and that was not the right button. First option is shown in red on the map, and that's basically to improve the existing condition. The second option would be use of the rail trestle. The third would be to construct a new bridge upstream of Third Street, as shown in blue there. And the fourth would be a brand new bridge near the confluence of the two rivers. On option one, we basically split it into three segments, the first being South Delaware Drive. The sidewalk is between 3 and 5 feet wide. The traffic lanes on Route 11 are 11-foot wide. There are no path markings, or signage, and the route is not ADA accessible. Many of the survey respondents commented that the narrow sidewalk, the sight distance, the road width, and the speed make it very difficult. Some commented that as they were they would have to step off of the sidewalk into the travel lane if someone was coming in the opposite direction. The area, as you can see, is restricted by the railroad trestle and the retaining wall. At the pinch point under the railroad trestle, the Route 611 lanes are not only 9 foot wide, and the sidewalk goes down to about 3 feet there. The river, Mount Ida, and the railroad bridge are all constrictions to, building a nice 10-foot wide trail through that area. That section of South Delaware Drive has about 4,700 vehicles per day and is about 670 feet long. The Third Street Bridge has 6 lanes, sidewalks on both sides of the bridge, no bicycle path or signs on that location either. The bridge, as we know, is a PennDOT bridge, and it is eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. It's a congested location with limited workspace. Structural analysis of the bridge would be required for any sort of widening or improvements there. And again, many of the survey respondents indicated that they will ride on the sidewalk there on the opposite side. Oh, it doesn't seem to show up on the, oh well. You can envision the pedestrians and the bicyclists ride on the east side of the bridge, which is and most of them responded that they do that because they were afraid to try to get in that left lane on the bridge and make a left at the traffic light. And the problem with doing that is that there's no crosswalks or anything on the opposite side of the bridge. That section of the route has about 8,800 vehicles per day, is about 350 feet long. Larry Holmes Drive has 6-foot sidewalks. They vary between 5 and 13 feet, and most of the trail is adjacent to parking in that area. That area of the trail does have Two River signage, and it has a paved section of the Two Rivers Trail. The issue with this path is the 4-foot wide could not facilitate a shared use path. The section of Larry Holmes Drive has just under 5,000 vehicles per day and is 860 feet long. The goal of the study was to look at ways to improve safety and user friendliness. The elevation difference between the DNL Trail, Route 611, there's not enough vehicle or vertical clearance there to cantilever a new sidewalk over the trail. We looked at the feasibility of cantilevering a sidewalk over the river, but then you run into issues with impacting floodwaters, and that would be a pretty detailed study. Options to improve there would be to fasten protective railing on the side of the retaining wall, construct, as you can see on the right there, a retaining wall with less batter, meaning more of a vertical wall. But I guess we'd have to keep in mind that any kind of wall construction there would close Route 611, likely. Additionally, if the sidewalk were to be cantilevered slightly over the DNL Trail, we'd have to sign it for low overhang. Some potential improvements at the Third Street Bridge would include reducing the right turn lane widths to gain an extra 5 feet of space per se, to construct a bike lane on the east side of the bridge. But ideally, the thing to consider there would be to reduce the lanes to 12 feet, alter the sidewalk on the east side of the bridge to install a barrier to perhaps provide room for two-way traffic on that east side of the bridge. And again, that would require a barrier between the travel lanes because you'd have contraflow in that bike lane. And that would also require a sidewalk and modifications to the traffic signal at the intersection of Delaware Drive and 3rd Street. The intersection of 3rd Street and Larry Holmes Drive has several obstructions. Some of the options there would include relocating the light standard you see there in the photo. Additional options may include reducing the curb radius in that area closer to the intersection to provide a wider sidewalk. That may also have a traffic calming effect, but before the city would make any changes like that, we'd have to look at truck circulation, stop bars, and vehicle detection at the traffic lights. The next option we looked at was to use the existing rail trestle. That concept came from a study that was done back in 2016 between the cities of Easton and Phillipsburg to examine the historic rail lines to see if they could provide a connection for tourism and such, and similar to New York City's High Line. The thought with that would be that users of the D&L trail would somehow, we'd have to either transverse the grade up Mount Ida to get them to that pedestrian bridge. That could happen two ways. One with a at-grade crossing of Route 611, or the other would be if you could construct some sort of elevated ramp to get up to the rail that's in the Delaware Canal Park. From there, the trail would progress along the active Norfolk Southern line, cross the trestle, and then come down at grade into the city leased parcel at near Washington Street there. Then would progress on street on the sidewalk through the area where the Wawa and the McDonald's is, and that connection would result in 3 at-grade crossings, would be about 4,000 feet long, and would require property acquisition and coordination with Norfolk Southern, the rail company. So that really wasn't a favorable option because of all the at-grade crossings and the grade differentials to overcome. And that's just a view of the trestle, what the trail would look like if it were to follow the old rail line. Option 3 would be to construct a new bridge upstream of 3rd Street. And the thought there would be that that would connect the D&L trail over to the commercial area. The problem with that is that there would be, the elevation of the bridge would have to be so high because of the floodwaters in the Lehigh. It would be very difficult to gain elevation off the D&L trail to come up over the river and land a bridge on the other side. Additionally, that trail would also require 2 at-grade street crossings, which really isn't desirable. Option 4 would be to construct a new bridge near the confluence. That would reduce the length of the trail from 800 feet down to about 900 feet. It would isolate pedestrians and bicyclists from vehicular traffic. It's the most direct connection. And as I mentioned before, the Delaware Canal Workbook envisioned a span of about 300 feet. Unfortunately, I guess as you'll see, as Dave mentioned, that the span we need is going to be much longer than 300 feet, which affects the costs. But, when we started this study, we kept in mind that the canal study envisioned an attractive platform, an icon for the city, so to speak. The hydraulics of the river played a major impact in understanding if a bridge would be feasible. As part of our work, we did a bathymetric survey of the Lehigh, and we prepared a hydrologic model that was about 6,000 feet long, extending upstream from the confluence of the rivers. And as you can kind of see, the FEMA floodplain is the 100-year floodplain, as you probably know, is shaded in blue on that map. And in the area of the proposed bridge, the floodplain's about 750 feet wide. What I personally learned during this is that the base flood elevation of the Delaware, when that floods, extends 2.4 miles upstream, and it's actually the flood elevation of the Delaware that would dictate the design of a new pedestrian bridge. When we began working with NTM on the modeling, we quickly learned that we could not have any piers in the river because that would affect it would increase flood water elevations. And suddenly that had us looking at a 420-foot clear span, which is much larger than you can typically find in a prefabricated pedestrian bridge, kind of like the mansion. Everybody seems to think of the Mansion House Bridge, but that's much shorter than this. We performed iterative hydraulic analyses and come to learn that the low chord, or the underside of the pedestrian bridge, would be up at elevation 192. For reference, Larry Holmes Drive is about elevation 178. So that bridge would have to be about 12 feet higher than the elevation of Larry Holmes Drive because of flooding. And as we went through those analyses, I'm getting ahead of myself, it became iterative because not only did it need to be a clear span, we had to be very careful about how we modeled abutments to make that grade change on the west side of the river. Because if you add too much of an abutment, then you're going to increase the floodwaters. But as Dave mentioned, we went through meetings with both the DEP and FEMA to make sure that they were on board with the models and that we had a valid study. As the next step in the study was to think about what type of bridge would be suited. I'm not a structural engineer, but I work closely with our structural engineers, and they explained that there are several types of bridges that could be applicable here. One of them would be a long span truss. Long trusses are economical, and obviously they would be compatible with many of the truss bridges that are located in the city. Another type of bridge that might work in this location would be a tied arch bridge because of the size of the abutments and the fact that we could not have large abutments in the river for hydraulic purposes. You'll love this one. This one is a cantilever spar cable stay bridge. And the reason they looked at something like this is because construction space. On the west side of the river, you really don't have a lot of room to work to construct a bridge. However, on the east side, you have more room in the Delaware Canal Park. This would minimize the abutment needed on the left side of the bridge, which would be the west side, whereas you'd have more room on the east side in Delaware Canal Park at a higher elevation to do something like that. This bridge is very pretty. It's unique, but there's also it's probably one of the most costliest bridges out there. This shows the concept of the vertical alignment and plan view of a bridge that would tie nicely into the grades at the Delaware Canal Park as well as Larry Holmes Drive without affecting floodwater elevations in the Lehigh. This, as you can see there, it's a truss bridge. That's not to say that in the future a truss bridge would be constructed there. However, it's going to, I guess, come down to costs and what the city can afford as well as what works there. Speaking of cost, I know it was mentioned as a concern there. The issue we came up with in trying to prepare a cost for this is there's not many comparable pedestrian bridges around of this span length. Our engineers feel that a tied arch or a truss bridge are going to be the most favorable for the city for a construction standpoint and cost. We did reach out to a specialty bridge design group that, designs those type of iconic bridges. They indicated that for a bridge like that, you could be looking up to $3,500 per square foot. As I had mentioned, the span of the bridge would be 420 feet. When you get a bridge that's that long, you need to start looking at a wider deck on that. The deck on a bridge like that would probably be about 20 feet wide. So as far as cost for a more plain tied arch bridge, we looked at vehicular tied arch bridges, and they run about $1,000 a square foot based on some recent estimates. And that would translate to a cost ranging from $8.4 million to $29.4 million. Understanding that that's a large price tag, we looked at some short-term recommendations, and those would be, as we mentioned before, to widen the sidewalk along South Delaware Drive, to modify the east side of the Third Street Bridge to make a two-way travel lane for pedestrians and bicyclists, adding a crosswalk at Third and South Delaware, providing better trail signage, and relocating the light standards at the corner of Third Street and Larry Holmes Drive. Long-term, we would recommend that the city, continue to seek funding for preliminary design of that bridge. And as part of that preliminary design, you would determine the appropriate bridge type and cost and any additional construction constraints. You would go through the process of obtaining your historical and environmental clearances for those changes. And as part of that preliminary engineering, you would also look at enhancing the hydraulic modeling that has been prepared to date. There's still a little bit more fine tuning with that, but what we did should, allowed us to understand that a bridge would be feasible. Any questions?
Questions from council? I question, can you back up to the plan view of the proposed bridge?
Yes.
Maybe go back a couple of slides there. Showed most of the Delaware, Third Street, and the bridge crossing.
The flood mapping?
Yeah, that's fine.
This here? Or?
Yeah, that's
okay.
That's good. I just want to use that as a reference. The green there is the 420 feet that you're talking about.
Correct.
Spanning the bridge.
Yes.
Just looking at that, if you move the bridge upstream, the river's narrower, and we're not going in a diagonal across the stream. I mean, I don't understand why this doesn't go perpendicular to the embank or the bank.
That's a very logical question. You would think the shortest distance, but what happens is the elevation that bridge has to be, and the elevation of the DNL trail, and you have so much going on. If I go back to that slide where you have the trail, you have a wall, you have 611, you have a mountain, and a trestle going through all of that. It becomes harder to make that all work.
But you could come in at the same location on the, I'll call it the south side of the river, but if you move the northern side of the bridge to the west, the span that you would cross is probably going to be decreased by, I would guess, maybe 100 feet.
I don't know about 100 feet, but I mean, we did look at that initially, but you also have a ramp in there that pulls boats off and on, and again, with that vertical change there, that might be difficult.
Yeah,
but that could be something definitely you could look
you have
at.
the whole Larry Holmes Drive to build a ramp. I mean, you have
Well,
hundreds of feet there to build a ramp.
Yes and no, because if you start building more of a ramp, you're going to impact the floodwater elevation, and you can't do that as part of your Chapter 105 permit.
I understand we have to go through a feasibility, but
Yeah.
I mean, even in what you presented, the entrances coming into the bridge that was in one of the diagrams restricted the floodway. Okay, and so that's going to have that impact too. But it's my understanding that as long as we don't impact by more than a foot, that's okay.
No, because it's a detailed study area, you can't impact.
Yeah.
No. If you had a project in an area that didn't have detailed study, that would be the case. But no, this is a detailed area. You can't increase more than, I think it's 1/100 of a foot.
And the elevation difference.
The bridge would have to, the low chord of the bridge would have to be set a foot above the 100-year water surface elevation of the Delaware, which
For 191.
191, yeah. So the bottom of the bridge would be at 192. Yeah, that is
And
correct.
so that was the reason for, was it option number 2, where you were coming across the Delaware upstream of 3rd Street? Is that option number 2?
Yes, that was
Okay.
option number 2.
And that was the reason for that one, is that we couldn't meet that 191?
I think the reason we looked up, the elevation is very similar up there. The reason we looked at that location was it was away from the dam, and that the city had property up there that we could, potentially land a bridge on.
And I guess my last, I'm just not sure of using the existing rail line there. The major reason for that was coming down off of the rail line to the D&L Trail.
Yes, because you would have in order to get up onto that bridge, D&L Trail sits down below the grade of the road.
Right.
You can bring it up through the park, but to reach the elevation of the rail line, you would essentially have to get a trail up to the top of Mount Ida. So you would either, cross the Delaware Canal Park, cross 611 and do some sort of switchback up the mountain, or you could somehow switch back through Delaware Canal Park to the rail siding and possibly do that. But the thing is there, you're putting a trail close to an active line, and that's not always desirable. Then with that configuration, you'd still have to cross, trail traffic across the streets. And ideally the goal is to separate them.
Yeah, just personally, I
No.
kind of like that option because I like the idea of us at least doing that component of the High Line. And
Yeah.
I mean, once that gets done, then maybe additionally we could,
Yeah.
continue on.
That's not to say that option would be off the table. I mean, that's why we're here for public comment.
Why, I don't understand, I don't know anything about hydraulics and flooding. But our natural assets, we talked about today in our staff meeting, our natural assets in the city are really great, but you can't get them. And we don't have a way, I mean, that's why we put Fire Home Drive on high, to try to get people across the street to the riverside or the waterfront. Why can't we get a pier in the middle of the river? I understand that would save us millions of dollars.
In the middle of the river.
Middle of Lehigh. There's one in the toll bridge has one in the middle of the Delaware River. I know that Dave and you said we can't do it, but what is the impediment? Is there a state law that says you can't?
Chapter that would fall under DEP Chapter 105, permanent wetlands and waterways.
You can't create slack water.
Yeah, and that any kind of pier in there affects the floodwater elevation.
There's a pier, you're just showing the 3rd Street Bridge, the Dr. Smith Bridge, you're right in the middle of that.
Yeah, but that was prior to modern day regulations. But yeah,
People use bicycles. They didn't have cars. Now they're back to using bicycles. We should be able to.
yeah.
I mean, $8 million is a ridiculous amount of money when there's so many other needs in the city. And that we don't even know that because it hasn't been put out for bid. So we don't even know, maybe 9 or 10 million. 29 was the top. I think it's really important we do it because the access to the D&L Trail is horrible from the east
What's that?
and from the south side. I mean, you gotta remember the south side is also in need of having a connection to the Keywood Park and the D&L navigation
Yes.
trail. There's straight trail. I just don't know how to monetize it, and maybe if we had it, we would attract visitors to the city for natural tourism.
Well, I mean, we've seen other trails seek a combination of funding sources from transportation set aside to multimodal, and Dave could probably speak to this. I'm sure that's what he lives and breathes, these grant funding applications and whatnot. But some,
Grants, but that's a lot of money.
yes, it is.
That's it. So we
Yeah.
have to come up with a match for the city of at least $4 million. No, $4 million. 29 million. Yeah. Who's right, shit?
So, I don't know if this is a possibility, but maybe another option would be to build the trail on the bottom chord of that bridge.
That might be considered an obstruction on the,
What?
on the bottom chord of, I'm
That's
sorry,
all
what bridge,
above-
maybe,
That's well above the floodplain.
the trestle.
The bottom quarter of that bridge is well above the floodplain.
I misunderstood you, I'm sorry.
What's that?
I didn't miss, when you said that bridge, I
No, I mean,
misunderstood what
that bridge right there, if you built the trail on the bottom chord of that bridge, you wouldn't have as big a elevation change.
that would be
back
unique.
Down to the trail.
That would be unique.
Yeah.
You might have to blast into Mount Ida though to connect the trail to it somehow, but that could be an option.
You gave us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to get somebody else's perspective because we don't all, think alike. Those are some good ideas.
Well, if you wouldn't have had that picture up there, I wouldn't have thought about it, so.
The biggest problem I see is that PennDOT has not even put a legitimate legal guide rail. It's a wire fence and there's people on bicycles right below it. I mean, it's very
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah, as part of that study, we did pull, the old archive plans and maps. And PennDOT will tell you in a street or a borough that they only own the right of way curb to curb.
In a city or a borough, right?
Yeah.
Roger,
Which actually they do right away.
we also looked at raising the trail up to the level of the sidewalk. So if you were to come over the bridge, you would then simply have, probably a 12 or 15-foot raised area, but we ran into the same problem with the tolerance of 100th of a foot. That's what you're allowed to raise the Lehigh. So by putting any piers in there to support,
Yeah, but you're reducing the cross-sectional area of flow then too, so.
right?
You'd be out of the ballgame with that.
It's really a balancing act.
I mean, that trail that the former mayor, one of the former mayors said would never last, went through the 4, 5, and 6 floods and was still there. Built well. Christine, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hopefully I didn't move through too fast.
But we will obviously look for grant money. This will help us get grant money.
Thank you, Christine. I just want to let everyone know that all the short-term recommendations, we've already applied for grants, and we've already applied for a grant for the preliminary design for a structure and siting of it. So hopefully, this is definitely, I would say, on our front burner. It has been for years. It's just a really complicated improvement.
Since Hearst was, I did the presentation to Hearst, I said, we're gonna build that
Bridge. We didn't build it yet, but that's okay. We're gonna build it.
It's really heavily used, and it's only going to get the demand from the public to improve this, as more and more people come downtown Easton, I think.
Well, Dr. Ruggles here would like to at least have something on that, no electric bikes on trails, because you can't hear them, right?
They zoom by me every time, and I'll tell you, some of them you can't hear very well, so some of them have tires that you can really hear, but some of them, they're right here when and they're moving. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, then we'll
While
open up to
you're
the
here,
public.
And this is trail oriented, not D&L trail, but trail oriented. The parking lot on Bushkill, I don't know if it's street or drive where it changes over there. I think there's a lot of city people who park in that lot during the day.
They do.
And what I've experienced is down on 13th Street, that lot gets totally filled. And so it's my perception that because of all of those cars that are in that lot from the city, there is no room for people to park. I mean, I've gone down to the 13th Street lot and not been able to park because it's totally full. And so, I drove through 500 and I see that there's a lot of cars in 500 too, but I think that we need to make room in there for more public parking for the trail, because there's a lot of people on the trail, and there would probably be more if they could get there and park.
We can certainly try that. Before the employees parked out there during business hours, the lot was completely empty almost all the time, and they had all their cars
Right.
sort of piled on each other inside the complex. So
Yeah.
at that time, which was probably, like, I'm terrible with chronology. I would say maybe 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah.
We can try it again and see if more people park there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if 13th Street wasn't filled up, I would say, well, they could just go to 13th Street, but it is packed.
Yeah, we can do that. No problem.
Any other questions from council before I open up to the public? Public, you could just, normally we require you to come up to the podium, but if you want to ask a question, please just stand and give your name and address and ask a question.
This is, being.
Oh, that's right, it's being recorded.
Yeah.
Come on up to the
Yeah, I gotta
podium.
go to the podium.
You have to go to the podium and speak into the microphone. Sorry. Anyone like to come up? Scott, I know you had a question.
Can I also ask everyone to sign the sign-in sheet? That would be really helpful for our grant purposes. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. Hi, everybody. Scott Slingerland with CAT, longtime resident of Easton, now a resident of Bethlehem, sorry to say. But I heard there was a trail meeting tonight, and I had to be here. And this was kind of an engineering presentation. I'm an engineer, but I'm going to start with the passionate plea. People come to Easton for the restaurants, for the theater, for farmers market, all these different reasons that people come to Easton, downtown. For me, it's always been the trails. The trails are the heart. Getting outdoors. Like you said, Mayor, the Easton's outdoor assets are
The nature.
sort of restricted. They're along the river. They're not so accessible from either downtown or from South Side, even College Hill. So you have the topography. But the passionate plea is that the trails and the nature make this a good city for me.
For a lot of people.
That's the heart.
You're talking for a lot of people.
So you can look at the benefits to the city residents. You can look at the tourism of the DNL Trail and how regionally, last October, I biked to Scranton, 100 miles from Bethlehem, mostly on the DNL Trail. You bike down New Hope, down to
That's only 30 miles.
down to Bristol, right?
Oh, Bristol's
Right.
over.
Right. So, Easton is really almost in the middle of the trail if you stretch it out. How it is now, the DNL Trail, it's like there's a gate that's closed. When you're on the trail,
Yeah, you're right.
there's maybe a little signage. You can see the city, which is great. From across the river from Canal Park, but how it sits, the access from the trail is not so welcoming. The city does everything it can with events and things, but to make the trail really, really flow into the city would really boost, tourism, both from hotels, Airbnbs, from the restaurants, from any kind of business that supports people on the trail, which is like you want to sleep, eat, and whatever you want, and check out what's going on. And we all know that, as you mentioned, the existing conditions are pretty poor. Generally accepted operating space for a bicycle is 4 feet wide. So a two-way trail should be really like 8 feet, 10 feet, whatever it can be. And what do we have? We have like 30 inches in spots. We have the chain link fence that's kind of dangling, which always carries some extra zip ties and zip it back up to that wire, just so it doesn't snag people's handlebars. But looking at creative options and come up with more along the way. We really need to do this in any way, in the short term and the long term, and what the city can do, and the bicycling community to really.
I bet we would get an award from CAT, huh?
We'll give you an award for anything. Yeah, for getting out. But I think that's it. I don't know if I have any questions. Did you say the total estimated cost?
8 to 29 million.
Okay, so, but what can we do in the
That's
short
just
term?
based on feasibility. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, there were no geotechnical borings, all
Yeah.
of those things that really go into the design of the bridge.
Yeah. I don't know if I have any other questions, but I support this project.
Thanks, Scott. So do I.
So, real quick.
Go ahead, Dr. Ruggles.
When you said that the lanes on the 3rd Street Bridge could be narrowed, how much actually can that be? That was actually widened.
Yes.
As I remember, at one point, the 3rd Street Bridge was widened, but I know there are wide lanes that are going through there, and just looking at your photograph, there's 6 lanes plus the 2 sidewalks.
Yes, it's quite a long
Yeah. Oh, okay,
cross-section there.
okay.
But basically, we would take each of those
12
travel
foot?
lanes
Okay.
down to 12 feet.
Which is
Remove
still-
that right, abutment on the right right side of the bridge and cantilever just a little bit to try to squeeze in a 10-foot trail there.
When he was saying short term, I mean, that was one of the things that you said that was a possibility in the short term is to make that
Yeah, that was-
access over the bridge a little bit wider for people. Yeah. What could we take those lanes down to?
Well, PennDOT would have the ultimate say, but I mean, that's based on 12 feet. 12 feet's usually acceptable. Like to go a little wider with a curb lane if you can, but, 12 feet is possible. And I don't know if you can see
Any
it.
other questions from the public? Comments, Jared?
Saw Jared riding his bike today, getting ready for this meeting.
Lunch ride. Tom. Jared Mass, 325 Northampton. I just really want to echo Scott's comments on outdoor recreation, economic development, community development. I think these types of projects are really important for Easton to kind of level up, not just access, but its ability to attract folks. The state of Pennsylvania is doing a lot of things on the outdoor recreation front. They just created or just appointed director of outdoor recreation recently, and I think the tie-ins to the governor's economic development plan will become more obvious to the greater Commonwealth in coming years. And when we talk about, benefiting small business through our festivals and through our promotions, I think outdoor recreation has natural passive ability to do that too. So again, compliment the city on looking at short-term solutions. I think the kind of use the word diet earlier. If giving a diet to that bridge crossing also serves pedestrians that are trying to cross a shorter distance. When you have a few hundred people at Confluence, they might cross Third, they might cross Larry Holmes, and if they cross Larry Holmes first and then make the cross of Third, that's a pretty long crossing, and I think is a disincentive for folks getting onto the trail. So
It's the worst interchange for intersection for pedestrians.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
I would
Third and
agree.
Larry Holmes Drive is just horrible.
And you're adding a lot of people over the next 5 years, and I think long-term thinking about this is important. And I think, the match situation with grants is something that the city hopefully can continue to work on with federal and state funds. I think this type of project is a federal DOT type of project that we could go to Representative Wild and Senator Casey and Senator Fetterman, and hopefully get some significant grants that the city maybe hasn't really punched for yet. So, in that case, combination of RACP, DCD, and federal grants might ultimately reduce out of pocket from the city. So I guess I'm just imploring the price tag of $8 or $10 or $12 million not to be a disincentive to looking at this further.
Definitely look at it.
And we're happy to explore the other possibility with the trestle. GDP purchased the trailhead for the trestle. We still have optimism that a Highline type of project is possible, another long-term project that supports outdoor recreation. I think it could be complementary to a bridge crossing, but it's going to take some time. So.
Thank you, Jared.
Hey, so just a quick comment about funding. A couple months ago, we actually had a really good presentation.
We're recording you, so you gotta get your name and address
Oh,
for the
sorry.
record.
Tony Claypatch, 1974 Mercer Way. A couple months ago, we actually had an interesting discussion about funding for a trail gap at our Forks Township Planning Commission meeting between Stockertown and Tatamy. We're trying to link it up to a new apartment complex up there. But we did get a presentation from Sherry Acevedo.
Acevedo.
Yep, sorry. And she gave a very good, basically just discussion piece on just the history of the 9/11 Trail, where it goes from New York to Flight 93 and Washington and through Harrisburg. So I just want to, kind of reiterate what everyone has been saying here today about how important it is to connect these things up, close the trail gaps, not just here in Easton, but also in Palmer and so forth there.
Thank you.
Well, we worked with the Hartcross pigment plant to get that connection made. So I don't want, the city does not want the warehouse there, but the developer has agreed to let us go through the property with the extension of the Carl Stern Arch Trail to the Palmer Trail, which then links up to the Forks Township Trail.
We got it right away anyway.
We have it right
We're
away.
still-
I don't know why the city, that was before my time. I developed the GJ Mills and a tenant calls me up and says, Sal, what are they doing? They have a, get that. They have a fence up. And so I came down to the city allowed them to put the fence across the trail so that you couldn't go through the hard cross. I said, it's a right of way. I mean, it's the state owns it. It's a waterway of the Commonwealth, but, well,
No,
you know.
It's where the Bushco interceptor goes.
Yeah, it's right. Yeah, the interceptor, the sanitary sewer line goes through there. So I guess your waste can go through there, but you can't. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Louis Mazzanti, 21 Sun Place, 18045. I'd be remiss not to say anything here. I think this is a project we've all been excited about. The potential, we've seen the need for it for a very, very long time. A lot of my work is with Valley Mountain Bikers, nonprofit organization, has a lot of cycling projects in the Lehigh Valley, including some potential ones here in Easton. I'm also a dad. I work at Hearst. I want to just kind of reiterate how dangerous this is, like from a dad's perspective, as a cyclist perspective. That section of that sidewalk that we know is 34 inches wide at its narrowest. Handlebars on a bike are 30 to 31 inches sometimes. And with a fence sticking out and mirrors on a truck coming by over that, flapping that sidewalk, it is really, really dangerous. So I was excited to see their short-term solutions as well as the kind of the more
We'll keep it on
ambitious
it.
ones.
We'll keep working on it. We're trying to get money for it, starting already. As you heard David say, we're already trying to get money for the project. We're pretty good at getting money.
Yeah.
OPM, other people's money.
That's great. And, I don't know if you know, Bethlehem had looked at this several years ago. I don't know if they still are, Scott, maybe you know. I put some presentations together from them when I was living over there too. It had been mentioned before, the economic impact of something like this, of getting people off of the trail into the city. It's like when they built
Well, we
freeways,
know what the
right?
tubing company has done for us.
Mhm.
They have hundreds of people every weekend eating in our restaurants
Yeah.
and shopping in our shops that are open. But because they were tracking it for us. And we're glad to have them. And that shows you that if they didn't come across the river, we would have had no tubing company on the Delaware. And the Delaware is a great tubing river.
Absolutely. And with cycling growing and booming, the number
Growing.
of people who are on bikes, looking for places to do, they're doing longer trips, they're looking for overnight trips too. So building that connection into the city of Easton, only going to help the residents here. It's going to help the city a ton.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Not only are we hearing about the bikes, but I'm hearing from several of my friends about how bad it is to run down there. Constantly complaining about us. They do the 20-mile run every Sunday, and they don't want to go anywhere else because it's close to home, right in their backyard. But it's dangerous as heck. And I heard somebody say something about tying the fence. Well, they've done that too. So it's just some food for thought. That it's a lot of money, but I think eventually we're going to have to do it through grants and what have you. And it's going to be a wonderful thing once we do that. I know we talked about this for a long while, Mayor.
Yeah.
I know at one point we talked about even having some kind of, I won't say festival, but people up there and doing kind of different things, something similar to like they do in New York and San Francisco.
Well, maybe we can go to Delaware River Joint Toll Bridge Commission.
They got money.
They got money.
They got some of ours.
They get a lot of ours. Anyone else? Yes.
Jeff Dingate, 941 Washington Street in West Ward. Mr. Brown, thank you for mentioning runners because I kind of represent runners around here. I lead groups of runners every single day, every Saturday. Just today, we were out running, and I mentioned the dangerous situations that are down there. And it starts here at this intersection.
And it goes
We're
all
trying to
6
cross
miles.
on the east side, and those cars are coming around that corner, and they don't always abide by the light, and there's zero visibility where that crosswalk is. You're so far around that corner. You can't see. So oftentimes we're standing out in the road trying to see where those cars are coming, just so we can take the crosswalk when it turns white, when the walk sign moves. And then we were joking about that fence today. I mean, I said, when you're coming back up this way off the path, you've got your back to those cars, and that fence didn't get messed up by bikes. I mean,
Yeah.
the poles are ripped out, the fence is in disarray, and you don't know what's happening from those cars that come screaming around that corner in a 25-mile-an-hour zone, and they're never doing 25. So never. So, those are the concerns of a runner. We're vulnerable, and walkers are the same way, and we're coming off those. We have to be on there. I was in the road today. I was with a couple other runners, and I was actually in 611 running, and I was like, this is a bad idea. I backed the car. So, as the
And that's
concerned
not,
runners,
that's not how we're trained to do.
it should not be, yes. But that's the only option we have because
Yeah.
there isn't a sidewalk on the other side. But it creates another problem, which I want to bring is we do look for alternatives. We don't want to go to that intersection. A lot of us don't. And I know a lot of people go further down the road and cross the train tracks, which is another dangerous situation. There are a couple of different spots down that way, which people do. So it creates unintended safety issues that we're not looking at just right here. That they do exist. So
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? David. You're looking well. How you been? Every day is a holiday. Every day is. His father was the fire chief for many years here in the city of Easton, and now he's a police officer in Wilson Borough.
No, I retired. I'm retired.
Oh, you're retired?
5 years
Okay.
ago.
How'd you retire
wow.
at 28?
David Brotsman, 828 Philadelphia Road. Was any consideration given to the north side of, or excuse me, the west side of Third Street Bridge and running the north side of Valley Station to make a ramp to get down to the bike path?
Yes.
And that's,
It's just acquiring right of way from the railroad, which is never easy. But that is part of the plan to try to see if we can. There's actually a couple things going on there. There's the overlook behind the train station that I think is pretty valuable real estate, and then there's, well, I can talk into it if that makes it easy. So we've looked at that as a possible overlook for the future. And then we've also looked at the possibility of getting some type of easement all the way through the rail yard and go down to the Abbott Street lock that way. But we're trying to prioritize getting people to Delaware Canal Park where they can go both south and north on the DNL.
well, that's what I'm saying. If you do it right behind, just west of the Third Street Bridge and taper it down, you'd be close enough that you could go either way. You wouldn't be all the way out at Abbott Street.
True.
That's just my opinion.
Thank you, David. Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much for attending the public hearing. We do need your name. If you signed in, please, if you didn't sign in, sign in. We do need the names. This is a public hearing that was required by our grant applications. We'll be applying for a lot of grants, as you can hear. Thank you, Christine, for your work.
Thank you.
Helps a lot. Mr. Lizanicki.
Mayor,
Yes.
I'm sorry. Can we take roll call?
Oh, roll call, yeah.
Yes. Awesome.
None of us were here.
You. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
Mrs. Rose? Here. Dr. Ruggles? Mayor Panto?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Pinnabone?
Here.
And Mr. Ettinger?
Here.
Mrs.
Thank you.
Sultana told me she would not be here.
At Frankie's.
Don't do that.
Um,
Don't do that. Don't.
Mr. Lizanicki, you're up. I have a copy.
Am I saying it correctly? Ettinger.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Military time.
Thank you. Why? You got military time?
No, that's right there.
Oh, I thought you were talking about.
Yeah,
now.
I get like the two of them. But I think I've been saying Ettinger.
Call him Big Jim
Big Jim.
from Lehigh Street.
Mark's up.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Mark, our director here this evening, and he will be going over the Aprils and March year-to-date and giving us an update also. So at this point, I would turn it over to Mr. Zanecki.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Council. So I just handed out the, feedback is bad. The first quarter results package that takes us through March of this year. As many of you know or have seen, the file is set up similarly to how it's been set up previously, where we've got all the account level details sorted by funds, by type, revenue versus expenses, and then we've got comparisons of the current year-to-date results versus the current year budget, and then also results this year versus last year, just for, again, comparative purposes. So you do have the package. I can email that out too if you prefer, but for the For this meeting, what I want to do is just go over some highlights. With now, again, 1 quarter under our belt, we've got a little bit of an idea of where things are headed, but obviously there's still, good chunk of time left before the year's over. Starting with the general fund revenue, that seems to be always a focus. Comparing to last year, you'll see that we're down pretty significantly. It looks like we're down 18% or $2.9 million, but please keep in mind that that's all, or for the most part, related to ARPA revenue. So last year, 2023, we did bring over $2.9 million of ARPA revenue, and that's basically what our variance is. We do have money set aside for this year, a little over $1 million, and we'll be bringing that over as needed, but right now, we haven't tapped into that. So going into some of the more operational line items, we start with real estate taxes. We're more or less flat, down a little bit over last year. Historically, in the last 6 or 7 years that I've been here, that number varies slightly through the first quarter, where it's never a given that everybody's going to pay, in the discount period. By the end of the year, we know that 98% of the people are going to pay, and that's just historically. It's just the timing of when they do make that payment. So we're pretty comfortable where things stand there. Delinquencies from Portnoy. As you know, we use Portnoy Law Associates to collect our delinquent real estate and utility billing accounts, folks who haven't paid there. That is up significantly, and we're at basically, yes.
I'm sorry, back on real estate tax.
Sure.
When do you expect that we'll realize real estate tax income from some of the newer developed apartments that are?
Many of the big projects are in LERDAs, so we won't see necessarily big.
But some of the big ones are off. They come off.
The
Governor
KOZs,
Wolf?
you mean?
KOZ.
Yeah, KOZs, yes. We do have, KOZs
They're off.
they sunsetted at the end of last year,
Yeah,
so.
they're off.
Yeah, so they're off, but we will be feeling some of those impacts still into this year for folks, those say for income tax purposes, so your earned income tax. Residents in the city were, who lived in the KOZ zones were able to get that discount or abatement, if you will. But, this will be the last, through April will be the last time that we're really going to be seeing the KOZ impact.
We have included, those assumptions were put into this year's budget,
Right.
into the '24 budget.
Silk Mills, but I realized.
Silk Mills
That be coming off.
Oh, it didn't come off yet?
No,
It is off.
yeah, all the KOZs across the state, I think,
Yeah.
across the Commonwealth.
No, of course, ours 10 years for us.
10 years first.
Depending when you got them, yeah.
We had
Got it.
a bump up, maybe half of 1%.
I mean, when I see that we're down 187,000.
I see, it's not linear.
Again, when people come in and pay their taxes, it's, again, by the end of the year, like I said,
Right.
we know
We-
that 98, 99.
But
we're gonna-
we have realized the money's already come in by the banks already. That
Yeah, the big three, say mortgage companies have all paid.
Okay.
So that was a significant amount of the 6.7 that we got.
And just for council's edification, we did get the LERTA approved by the county. Last Thursday or Tuesday, I was at the meeting, and they approved it. All but one person voted for it, Mr. Heckman, and I didn't have a chance to debate him. He was under some serious issues that he didn't understand about LERTA, because LERTA pays the base tax. Whatever, you don't lose any money. You don't lose any money.
That's the difference.
And he just didn't understand that, but that's okay. We had 8-1 vote, so. But it was approved. And so those projects include 2 affordable housing projects over on the south side, both Shiloh Commons and the Shiloh owner occupied on Phillips and Charles. And then it's the hotel, the old law firm, a guy Fainer owns across on Lens Court. 9 properties. Oh, out at the old Circle Systems to make that an industrial maker space, like a business incubator. Any other questions on the revenue?
I do have a question.
Sure.
Your listing here for, I was reading it and I lost it, sorry. this. Where are we on, we were talking several weeks ago about, starting to re-implement, turning off, water, or getting, Suburban to turn off water for delinquent, bills that we are experiencing. Where are we with those bills, you know?
Yeah, we have not yet turned over anything to Easton Suburban for water shutoffs at this point. We're still going through our list to I guess figure out, okay, which accounts are going to Portnoy. Obviously, we want to send the bigger ones to Easton Suburban for more pressure to get those paid quickly. So we're just figuring out where that line will be between the two. And again, we can send up to about 40 accounts per month over to Easton Suburban. So figuring out which those 40 are is basically that's in process. So we'll have.
My suggestion is just take the top 40.
Yeah.
And then we can work from there.
Fair point. There are a number of other revenue lines in the general fund. We'll point out earned income tax is up year over year, and we're more or less on target for the year as far as the budget goes. So that's good. Because
Why is it giving us the percentage? It should be at 25% now, right? First quarter.
Yeah, and it more or less. Well, I mean,
Well, I'm looking at earned income tax. It says minus 37%.
No.
It's 13.7%. Okay, 13.7, but it's not 25.
That's good, then we're ahead. It depends on which column you're looking at.
I'm looking at percent used, which means 7% collected.
That's 37%. It should, if it's.
13%.
Then
We're off.
Then Mark has to explain it, why we have, it's not linear, maybe the collections didn't book yet. Cause they come in, they lag about
It's
a month or so.
13.7%. I mean, it should be at 25% if it's the first quarter.
But Mayor, the
Oh yeah, I know this the third month of lag.
13.7 is actually for the real estate transfer tax. It's the line above. So earned income tax, both resident and non-resident. Resident is 23%.
Oh yeah, there it is, at 24%.
Non-res is 24. Yeah. So, and again, as Louis mentioned, it's not you don't get 25% each quarter. There are fluctuations in between. So
Sure, because
I think
last week in the quarter, it gets paid in
That's right,
third quarter,
that's right.
second quarter.
I think the point is that looking at this, that we don't see anything necessarily to be concerned about. But we saw something in parking in the 4th Street garage. That one was the dailies were a little low, but we had some issues in the beginning of the quarter where we had to keep the gates up. It was an operational issue.
We're going to talk about parking next.
So I know, but I'm just saying, we
I don't
lost.
get on the
We
people.
lost.
We'll be here all night.
We lost revenues. That's it. That's the only line item that I picked up that was that's something that we're watching. I mean, a highlight is definitely permits.
Any other questions for
No.
Louis or Mark about finance?
No, we'll move it along. Frank.
if there aren't any, and if anything does come up, please let me know afterwards. And
Yeah,
be happy to.
They just got it to
Yes.
print out, because I had it. Going to go to economic development, Mr. Pinnabone.
Real quick, I just wanted to mention, and I'm glad Dwayne is here. Oh, sorry. Dwayne, the permit process, when you fill out a permit, right? I'm totally fine with contractors to big development. Is there any way to simplify the permit, the design that we have to submit for residents? I have tons of residents that call me, one just the other day and said, I want to put a shed, and I feel like I need an engineering degree to fill out this permit form. I don't even want to pay the money to do it. I'll just risk getting caught. I mean, it's very difficult.
I am an engineer, and I have a problem filling out the permit.
It's just,
They
you know.
are, that form, I will tell you, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I'll tell you something.
You're making my point.
The two girls that you got working out front are great. They really help, and I think without them there, you probably wouldn't have any permits filled out because people are so confused.
No, I understand the shed one or the fence one. There's a lot more information when it was originally put in was required. It's just something I have that on my list to complete. There's a couple different forms that I have to reformulate just so it's a little bit easier for residents, so they don't have to fill in. So if you're putting in a shed, you don't really have to know the size of your lot,
I had a gentleman ask me on Southside, can you come over this weekend and help me fill it out? And I can't fill it out.
Well, I mean, there were things on there when I was trying to fill it out. I didn't even know what the definition was.
Gotcha.
You know, it was like, are you a B, or C? And I'm like, what is an A, B, or C? I mean, I'm making those things up, but I mean, it was something that I had no idea what it was, you know.
No, I got you. Yeah, those easier permits, they are on my radar to change, to edit, just to make it more user-friendly for people.
I mean, I was out in Palmer, and they have a sheet of paper out in their lobby that was, to me, was very straightforward, you know, to fill out for the permit. And here it is, boom. And I realized that, you know, we've gone more digital
Yes,
in that aspect.
Yep.
But still, you know, but I will compliment the two women that you have working out front.
I appreciate it.
They really do a great job helping people.
Thank you. I'll definitely
Get a
let them know.
copy of that Palmer application. No, you and your team are always really helpful, but I think that sometimes just the way we have to look at how, you know, just because we had the application one way for so long, we have to revisit it. We want people to improve their properties. So I fear that sometimes it might prevent people from doing that when they get confused, and not everybody will reach out for help either.
Yeah, I mean, we always have people come down and use the kiosk. If they can't figure it out, I've walked people through it over the phone when they've had questions. So
Yeah, you helped me recently too. So
I mean, it's it's a work in progress. I mean, it's on my list of things to get done. While I'm
I mean,
here.
the way it came to me was, what is my fine if I don't get a permit for my shed? I said, why? He said, no, the cost is fine. I can't figure it out. So I'd rather just build it, let them fine me, and I'll pay it.
Well, 12 by 10 or less, don't need one.
Right, yeah, his is bigger.
Yeah. Well, you need a zoning application.
Unfortunately.
You need a zoning application,
Zoning.
not a building application, not a building permit.
All right, what else, Mr. Pinnabone?
That is it. Thank you very much.
Well, before we just jump in,
You're not Mr. Pittman, I'm sorry.
Oh, no,
I'm
sorry, Frank.
Thank you.
Oh, I thought, it was an honor to be called Mr. Pinnabone.
Should be.
All right, so, before we just talk about a just brief review to continue our parking discussion, and we're gonna keep that brief. I asked Dwayne to stay up here because, Roger, you had a question, regarding the ordinance that's coming up, regarding, boarding.
Right.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think tonight, like, if we have staff, let's ask the questions, so I'm not stuck and I can't answer something. Plus, it's very specific. That's a very, like, subject, like, he's a subject matter expert, so let him talk about that.
Yeah. So the reason for taking out painting the boarded windows up, because they needed to be replaced within 30 days, either with a new window or with clear boarding.
Right.
So I understand what you're saying. Nobody wants to see a plywood window. My thought process behind that was it's going to get replaced within 30 days. So it's just a notice that, to me, I know it's going to get replaced and it's going to be an eyesore. People are going to call, and it's more of, we'll get it replaced. I can keep it where we can keep it the same where they have to paint it. They're still going to have to replace it within 30 days. So
Yeah, I realize that. And it was one of those things to me when I was reading it. I figured that was the answer, but to me, that was not a good enough answer in order to remove it from the ordinance.
I got you.
And it might be a good enough answer not to put it into the ordinance, but since it's already there, I just thought.
That's fine. I mean, we can leave it.
And I mean, it's not that big of a deal to paint things.
Yeah, no, I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. My thought process was that it was going to get replaced anyway.
Right.
It was just one less thing that they had to do.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay. All right, so,
Before we get to the paper.
Thank you.
yes.
Let's let Dr. Rogel talk about his yellow dot.
Which is a great idea.
Okay. I saw this, and I'm not sure where, but this is for council, this is the thing that the state sends you. And what it is it has in it, information that is, associated with the people who own the car. And so if you get in an accident and let's say you're unconscious, the first responders see the yellow dot in the window. They know to go to your glove compartment and this will be in there. And it has all your medical information right in here. So they can then transport that with you to the hospital.
I think
It's a program from the state. It doesn't cost us anything. All we have to do is advertise it for people. And actually, I was talking to Dave beforehand. I actually think we ought to have this in our city vehicles too.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, hopefully we never have to use it, but you know, if somebody gets in an accident, you know, here's.
You're talking to the choir.
Yeah. but I and like I said, there's no charge. People voluntarily can use it, and I think it's you know a great opportunity for us. So,
Councilman, I have a question for you. Maybe we can go a step further, or maybe you have it in there. Montgomery County started it last year. They have something similar. It's not a dot, but it's a red envelope. And it's not just medical, it's people that have PTSD, anxiety, something like that. If they get pulled over by the police, they show the red envelope. The officers understand that, you know, they're not, you know, they might have other issues. They're not being defiant. They're not under the influence.
yeah.
They might have anxiety or they might, you know, be dealing with something. So I don't know if that's in there. If not, if maybe we can add something like that. It's more for when a person gets pulled over by the police. If they're, you know, PTSD or something like that, they can show that they have this red envelope. And the officers just know, okay, this isn't a person under the influence. They have an issue.
Yeah.
And can work with them better. So maybe we can add that somehow.
Yeah, and I'm not sure where I read it, but it does say someplace that if there are additional things that have to be added to this, that you just attach them to it. So, you know.
And I'll get a copy of what Montgomery County does.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll get it over to
Okay,
you.
okay.
That'll work. Thank you.
One more
That's
thing
a
before
good
we get to
idea.
before we get to the parking word, the P word.
We don't have to get to it. We don't have to get to it.
We know, yeah, we do. There's a couple things we need to talk about tonight. I gave you all a list, a resolution that I'm thinking about entering into the record in 2 weeks, not tomorrow night because it's not time. It's not. We don't have 24 hours, but everywhere I go in the city, and I wish she was here tonight because I would talk to her in front of her face. And I don't like talking when she's not here.
She's at Kenny's.
But I am. Everywhere I go, I get people ask me why I didn't do something with her, and I tell them I don't have any power. I can't throw her off of council. City council can't vote. In the Constitution of the United States, Congress is allowed by 2/3 majority to fire somebody from Congress, as they did with Melendez. We don't have that in our charter. I think it's something we can add to our charter, but we can at least censure her. And I know that she's only going to say I'm trying to silence her, but I think she's bringing shame to the city council as a whole. She's definitely bringing shame to the city, and I went to all the polls today. I was bombarded with, why don't you do something about her? You're not doing your job. My job.
That's, Mayor, the biggest question I've gotten since being on council is why we don't do something about
Everybody.
Councilwoman. And I got to explain nonstop that there's not much we can do. So
Even after explaining, even by them bringing in, we can even go back to no confidence. We can say we have no confidence, but she doesn't have to step down.
Doesn't do anything.
Yeah, you know.
She doesn't have to listen to not say. Here's a lady who on TV said she's going to sue our police department. I mean, come on. I mean, I don't think she realizes that since she doesn't want to be a councilwoman, she wants to move up. I don't realize she realizes that as a councilwoman and you say negative things about your city, they think you're coming from a position of no, you know it. And I just think that she needs to be reprimanded the best we can. And the only way I know we can, and I've had this for probably 4 weeks on my computer. I did not print it out till tonight because the election's over. I did not want to break at a campaign issue and embarrass her or anything else, but this has got to stop. I mean, my wife brought out about her kids on the dais, and I didn't ask her to remove the kids from the dais only because I didn't want to get in an argument with her. I'm tired of arguing, and I didn't want to get yelled at that I'm picking her because of her race or I'm picking her because of her religion. I mean, woe is me. I mean, but I'm tired of her calling me a racist. That does make the hair on the back of my neck stand up because I don't think I'm a racist. I know I'm not a racist. But when she calls me a racist, I really get mad, and I said bullshit one night, and I shouldn't have said it, but I did.
Sound good?
Kenny, how did you feel when she called you a racist?
I know who I am. I didn't pay her no mind.
Exactly. I mean, I don't get upset. Maybe I should, but when she speaks, I don't even listen.
I asked her, but I did say, have you seen my family photo? And she wouldn't answer me. I said, if you had seen my family photo, you would see we look like the UN.
When she called me a racist, my son was upset. Because he's half African American, so he was a little questioning, like, Dad, what's going on? Joking with her, but
Well,
it was ridiculous.
I just wanted city council to read it, and I
So-
will also tell you while she's not here, that the chief gave you an invite to the Officer of the Year award, and she's not invited.
Mayor, so you said at the beginning of this, you were considering. Are we?
Well, I would do it in 2 weeks, not now.
No, I know, but are we, so you are?
I would like to.
Okay. I mean, if you need a consensus, I'm all in.
So the only
thing we can do is
thing is we disapprove of you.
Yeah.
That's basically
That's
what
basically what we're saying.
That's it.
Well, but I think there's more, and Jeremy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because we sent to someone years ago when I was on chairperson for the vacation school, and anytime that person spoke on something that had nothing to do with the subject matter we're talking about, we can gavel them down and tell them that we're not approved, well, we disapprove of what they're saying.
I don't know off the top of my head if that's an option. I'd have to look into this issue here.
It falls under Robert rules, I think. It really does.
I'll have to research that. I've never looked into that particular issue. I'll look into that and be happy to give you advice on that one.
That's when we
Yeah,
have
in the future. I can.
problem with.
You want me to bring that information tomorrow?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
And I think the other thing, if you would look into, is I know the charter, because I was on the charter commission, but just maybe look into third-class city code and see what those, what the third-class city code
Hey, you won't have
says.
an answer for me tomorrow. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah,
Email me later in the week. I mean,
yeah.
Okay.
But I think, when we don't have it in the charter, the fallback is third-class city code.
Correct.
So, if there's something in there,
Every third-class city has a code of conduct. We don't have one. So I researched that as well, and I have
Okay.
Bethlehem's code of conduct and Lancaster's code of conduct, and I'm using them as a model to bring that forward as well.
Right.
And maybe I should do that first.
I think that's a great idea. So, I'm really exhausted from hearing her baseless accusations. I served on Easton Civil Service Board for 7 years, and I'm really proud. I don't want to speak for any of you. I think most of you, everybody up here, is proud of our police force. We don't have the problems other parts of our country has, and to have to sit up here and watch a video of her arrest last summer, it was really awkward. I don't think we should have to go there, unfortunately. But I mean, our hands were tied at that point. I understand. So I really think that looking at a code of conduct is probably our first step, because then I think that something like this, the censure, will hold more merit.
Mayor, just to mention, we spoke 2 weeks ago about, and it was really in light of the ceasefire movement here, about eliminating people that don't live here from speaking during public comment. Today at the polls this morning, I was at 9th Ward, and Anissa from Southside was there. And she led the groups. If you guys remember from Southside, she led the groups, and she told me today that listening when I mentioned about the woman who lost her father and didn't get a chance to speak because it was just too long because everybody was speaking and taking time. She said that they felt bad and they talked inside their organization, and they're going to limit their speaking at different times so they don't hinder residents. And because, as her being a resident herself, it's important that residents get a chance to speak. She also said that they've been protesting all over, and by far, the Easton Police Department has been the best. She said they're respectful, they're nice, they explain things. The chief has been great. So she was just really applauding our police department today for such a great job they do. So I want to, because Councilwoman and the mayor were right. She's talking about how bad the police are, and I heard during her children's arrest this week that she really gave the police department an earful because I guess they were wrong again somehow, even though it wasn't the Easton Police. And to hear other people who say, listen, our police are doing great. You know what I mean? I wish they could have been there to hear it, but it's good to get that acknowledgement. So.
Okay. Now you can talk about the P word.
Okay, we're so Mazen, if you can put that up on the screen. All right, so I'm going to show you 3 different maps here. The first one, this is a map that shows by permit blue and red permits. Okay, so
Hold on a second. Who is that?
that's you, Mayor.
Playback.
Oh, Mazen, can you turn that off? Mazen,
Oh, okay.
Mazen likes to play.
I just want to make sure nobody was coming in on us. Like that one night.
Is there a delay like there is with a live broadcast in case we say something?
Yes, but we can't go in and edit it, so it's still going to come up anyway. So anyway, this shows the heat map. Obviously, if you look at the on 3rd Street, right before you get to the Lehigh River, that's the City Hall area, etc. I wanted to show you, just so it gives you an idea from this perspective, where all the permits are located, okay? So we talked about permits last time. I'm not going to hash that out, but we have roughly about 560 some permits. It does change. Like I sent you guys all an email of this. So it can change every couple of weeks or so, plus or minus a few, right? But just so when you're looking at my emails and you say, hey, they're off by 1 or 2 or 3, that's normal, okay? So I wanted to show you blue and red. You can see that over in the blue, there seems to be like a higher concentration than there are red.
Right.
But again, I showed you that data just so you can physically see it. I know the confluence was an issue recently, but I do want to show you where the majority of the permits are located. All right.
Now, just real
Yes, those
quick
are-
on this.
those are home address.
Why are there blues in the red?
There are blues and reds, literally.
No, I said why are there blues in the red?
They're the parking zones.
Oh, it depends on what you purchase.
They're what?
You could purchase. Well, you can purchase, Marcus. Those are gold.
Gold, you can park either one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Those are gold.
They look blue to me.
Sorry, they're brown actually. They're they're Bethlehem Catholic colors. Like,
Okay.
That's a Bethlehem Catholic brown.
Do we know how many people have the gold permits, just per chance?
Marcus.
30 some.
Okay, so
Yeah,
not
Marcus
too
is
many.
Marcus has his data. Let me go through the next one.
Sorry.
Marcus, why don't you come up here and just stand here for a second? 'Cause you're going to go over through some of this stuff. Go to the next slide, which was the report showing multiple passes. Mazen. There you go. All right. So you asked me this question. This is again roughly how many households have multiple passes, and you can see the number. I thought it was like a handful. It's a little bit more than that. That's there's 24. Doing some rough math there, and then the 2 permits that equals 110 passes. So just to give you an idea, that takes up some real estate on the street. Does that make sense to you? Real basic. Does this make sense to you guys? Okay.
Is that passes to or permits to an individual, or is that permits to an address?
It's to an address to vehicles.
Right. 4 permits would be 4.
As in
cars. Oh, it's individual.
It's individual.
An individual person has 4 cars?
That address.
Oh, you mean
Husband, wife, 2 kids.
Because
No, he said an individual.
because now that doesn't
Excuse-
satisfy my answer. I mean,
No,
my
no,
question.
Those are 3 like when you look at 4 residents issued 4 permits, 4
vehicles.
households. I don't know if it's like by individual, but 4 households. Okay, 4. Excuse me.
Individual.
Residents issued 4 permits.
3
So
individuals
3
have
households.
12 permits.
3 households have 12 permits. How you
Gotcha.
slice, how you
Gotcha.
slice and dice it? They have 12.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Uh,
so that first word there, instead of residents, should be households issued for permits?
Yeah.
Or residents issued for permits?
Per house.
What I'm asking is, if my wife and I live downtown, and she goes and gets a permit, I go get a permit, are we in the residents issued one permit? She was issued one, I was issued one?
I don't know why, I don't know, there's no way, it's by vehicle.
It would be issued one.
But it's by vehicle. Like if you have one vehicle, or you're gonna have two vehicles.
So the way you broke it down.
Hold on.
Basically, we track, when you go and apply for the permit, you put your name, you put your address, your phone number.
Right.
So, for example, one of those people that have 4 permits, it was just one person, his name is, let's say John or something.
Right.
He bought 4 for his household. 'Cause
Right.
they're all
Yeah,
under his
so
name.
it could still be multiple drivers, but like my dad bought my car in high school, so his name was on the owner
Exactly.
of the car. It wasn't my name back then.
We can narrow the data further and just get the exact address, but some people might have put 109 North 3rd Street, apartment 2.
Right.
People might just skip the apartment and just. So.
I mean,
So that's,
my question was framed around that particular residence, that
building.
entity, okay,
Yeah.
whether it's apartment A or apartment B, whatever, how many do that entity have? Right.
So that, I think in the other part that we're trying to find out what the potential problem is of an individual having multiple permits. So one person, because he has 2 or 3 cars, or she, is taking up that real estate. Like, to me, when I looked at that question, it was like a potential problem. Like, is this equitable? Like having one residence having up to 4 passes.
Right.
One residence,
Right.
one dwelling or one unit, having up to 4 passes.
I-
That's the way I looked
Yeah,
at it.
I would agree with you, but also from my perspective, okay, if there's a, I'll call it a housing unit, a place where somebody lives,
Yeah,
I mean,
you could have 4 people living in there, and each
that's
has a
okay,
car.
but you can have 2 passes,
Okay, so
right?
so
You know,
that's,
That would be two.
so
I mean,
that's up to
we
you.
need to be able to limit that because, in today's world, you could have family members, which we allow
Yeah,
unlimited number of family members. You have 14 family members living in a location, they have 14 passes for parking downtown, and that's
One of the
not
things
right.
I'm gonna talk about is ordinance changes, and one of the ordinance changes should be that.
Yeah.
And the other one, because I know Tony Lizick, he has his big green car in he parks in the garage. Well, he could park on the street for $100, but he pays the $70 a month.
all right, well, let me keep going through this,
Okay.
because first of all, you're absolutely right, you hit the nail on the head. Part of the management of the system is the ordinance, which means it's council.
Right.
So you guys have to understand what we're dealing with. I mean, at our last meeting, if you recall, we had to, I carefully tried to explain that there are nightly parkers and daily parkers in our garage. You probably see the same phenomenon occurring on the street. All right, that's why I wanted to show you that map. That's how I started out by residents, where you can see blue and red. We're going to talk about that in a second. We're going to go into a little bit of detail. Dave's here too, because Dave sees other aspects of this parking system. He's a component of it. But let's move to we're going to move to the next slide. So whether that other slide is a problem or not, it's something that we need to discuss with you, and we do need some assistance administratively, because the CA per se or anyone like the chief does not have the power to cap right now permits.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've done one cap, and that's cap on the number of units per building. It limits. Who can
Stop the big
Yeah,
project.
yeah. It stopped the big projects. We did that deliberately, just so everyone knows. We stopped the Seville, the Marquise, and the Confluence from getting permits on the street. We did that deliberately when that first came about. All right, so now let's go to the next line. This is where I'm going to have Marcus talk a little bit. So if I wish we could put these side to side, but if you recall, we had more blue dots than we did red dots.
Right.
Okay, and the blue dots were all up north of Northampton. I mean,
Right.
it's crowded there. So let's recap, Marcus, and talk about
So,
how many passes do we have of blue versus parking spaces in blue?
so basically we oversold the amount of space.
Well, don't worry about, let them figure that out. We didn't know, we didn't oversell anything, actually.
Well,
We're following, we're following
the
the.
amount of
no,
spaces
no,
that we have.
Yeah, yeah, but
The amount
here's
of
the-
spaces that we have,
we're following the ordinance.
according to the ordinance.
Yeah, that's exactly
We don't have enough spots
The-
for the
good-
permits that are
right,
issued.
right, right,
That's
right,
what I'm
right.
trying to say. So basically, we have in the blue zone on the north side, we have 341 permits, active permits right now. Okay? In the red zone, we have 121 active. And then we have the gold, 31 total. And then we have Fifth Street, which is the part of the red zone. South Fifth Street's part of the red zone, but they get a free parking permit. According to our numbers, which this has to be, we have to go over these again, says 68 cars are on that street.
68?
Which
Probably more than
there
that.
can't be.
Yeah.
Not in that one unit block.
No.
Because what happens is, when you sign up for that parking permit in the South Fifth Street, it just reoccurs. There's no fee, because it's free.
That's going from the bottom all the way up?
Oh, so you have,
That goes from Northampton Street
yeah.
North Ferry?
to Ferry.
Okay, got it.
Right.
So you have some duplicates, that's what.
Yes.
So we have to,
But
that's,
you also have a lot of apartment buildings closer to Ferry.
No, most of them are owner occupied.
Right. Yeah, but I'm on the if you're on the left side, if you're going up towards Ferry on the left side at the end, those apartments at the end are 4, 5, 6 units.
So-
you have 2 in each.
So
They got parking.
the main concern is that we have the spaces available. We have 855 total spaces downtown. We have 855. But according to ordinance, only 500 and, I think it was 520 are eligible for the parking permits.
I got you.
If the only solution that I could see, and we talked about this earlier,
Marcus, I'm sorry. Why don't you now dive into the blue zone? How many spaces do we have in the blue zone?
spaces, total spaces,
How many permits, how many permits do we have in the blue zone, which you mentioned,
we have.
versus spaces in the blue zone?
Okay, so we have, we have 256 spaces in the blue zone,
And then how many permits do we have in the blue zone?
341.
We have 341 in the blue zone.
Over.
Plus, add 31 gold, because gold can park anywhere.
Yes,
So how, Louis,
correct.
if you don't mind, or Marcus, I don't know. How did we not just count or pay attention, or
We didn't have a cap. Anybody can get it.
We never had a cap.
Yeah. You gotta.
So I get yes, the ordinance again, but I mean it was just
Well, first of all, I'll tell you, this is, it's not like I can issue an order internally, because the departments, they manage themselves, like they have their own regulations. And so PD is gonna manage by the ordinance. So if I say something, it's not necessarily, I'm gonna hit a brick wall.
no. I understand how it works,
Yeah.
and it has to go to council. I
Right,
get it.
right, right.
I just wonder how, in the history of parking meters in downtown, no one said
It's only been recent in the last 2 years.
The boom.
But see, you got to understand though, also, on the red side, we have a lot more spaces on this side
Yeah, we have
that are
150
free.
more extra.
So let's, there's one more,
Yeah,
one more
but-
piece to this puzzle, okay?
too far away.
There's one more piece to this puzzle. So we did expand the zones. We were somewhat liberal on our enforcement of the zones.
That's correct.
So, but we found, again, something unique to the parkers. So even though we expanded the zone, so we said, hey, blue zone, we're congested, you guys can expand. You guys can park on Larry Holmes Drive, you can park here and there, etc. No one's parking in those spots. So everyone's going after the prime real estate. That's the prime.
First
parking.
come,
Because I mean, from blue,
I don't remember
I don't wanna-
ever getting that kind of communication that you could park
Sorry,
down
Kobe.
there. It's
Marcus,
so,
why don't you
so
talk
you,
about
I am in the blue zone.
It's a good.
Yep.
My husband and I, both 2 people, one home, have 2 blue zone permits. I've actually always been able, except for the festivals, to find a spot in my quadrant of the downtown, I'll be honest. So
Yeah.
despite seeing those numbers, I don't hear those complaints from my neighbors unless it's something's going on downtown. And then you usually just have to go a little bit farther. So, I mean, I've had pretty extensive feedback from people in the area. But I didn't know that I could park on Larry Holmes, honestly.
Well, if you're in the red zone, you can.
Oh, I thought.
Oh, in the red.
Yeah, the blue.
So you wouldn't be able to park down by the park on
Correct.
the lake. Okay.
There's no
So
parking
that's
there.
probably why I didn't get that
That's where we should look
communication.
at.
Well,
Oh, there is
no,
parking.
there's
That's
no
right.
meters down there, so you should be able to park there.
So one
I
thing-
drove by there today, there's no
Yeah.
meters.
Across from the,
So guys, when we're talking about this, right?
no, there's meters
cle-
there.
Clearly, there's a problem in the system. I know what you're saying, Crystal, but the feedback we're getting at the most recent like planning meetings and zoning meetings and council meetings is that there's a problem, right? So part of this is saying, what can we do to create less scarcity out on the street? Number two is we've explained it to council. At nighttime, we have high vacancies in the garage. All right. At nighttime, it's a greater than 50% vacancy. We're seeing this. All right. So this is we're identifying what we think are problems. Again, you know, and you're right. Maybe like on the street, you're experiencing something else. I guess we're hearing different things.
Well, I think at the planning meeting, you're seeing business owners who have concerns about what the long-term parking in the garages will be. I think the other thing we have discussed in the past too is directional signage, much like with the trail that we discussed today. How do people get to the parking garages who visit here? I think that's why they end up trying to circle and find something on the street, because in a lot of cases, if you're not from Easton, you don't necessarily know where the garages are.
Sure.
So I think there's that side of it too. That's one way we can push parkers into the garages. I don't know that I didn't at least hear any of the residents who were worried about their own street permit parking. I know they probably get pissed off during Garlic Fest and Bacon
I bet
Fest.
they do, yeah.
I don't move my car during those weekends, I'll be honest, but I knew that coming in downtown, and
Interesting.
the
you say that.
festivals were also
Yeah.
part of the appeal. We can't plan for a festival because there are other ways for people to get into the city, in my opinion.
I'm glad you said that, because one of the things that we talked about today, as we're meeting more regularly as a team here, is that if you live in the downtown, and you said it, if you know you have a festival coming, either A, you're leaving for the weekend, or B, you're just parking your car and you're not moving it. You know, but the reality is that there's an onslaught of new residents coming here, right? So we have to, in addition to thinking about the cap, we have to make other policy decisions which affect the ordinance.
Yeah,
right?
but what the onslaught would be in the apartment buildings,
In the garages, right? So we still have to make
or their own on-site parking if the developer decides to do that, I guess.
right. So what we're going to see is a potential jam up, like past 5 o'clock in the future, which will affect the State Theater and will affect us on special events. It's good. There are what I call peaks. So we're going to have our peaks and valleys. I mean, our norm is probably right now. Our norm is less than 50%, but our peaks on average in terms of parking in the garages, and then on the streets a little bit different. We don't have utilization on the street, and we want to get that technology. So all I could give you is these numbers, right? And you gave me your experience. So and I can just show you the data. But we need to pay really careful attention to how we manage the system. That's the point of what we're bringing up. Right now, we do have a need, I think, to cap the on-street parking permit program, or we need to look at different ways on how we manage. In some cities, manage block by block, you know, and they give the power to the residents block by block. They do that actually in Bethlehem, is one city that we looked at. What else did we want to say on this? Anything else that hit a chord here?
We wanted to do ordinance to cap it and raise the price on the permits for 3 and 4 cars.
Well, listen, no. So,
Per person.
Oh, if you wanted
Per household, rather.
If you wanted to do that, and you know, in talking to Dave, Dave looks at total capacity, like what is a good run rate, so to speak, for occupancy in the garage. You know, and that could vary, you know, in like from city to city.
you know, our recommendation is looking at around an 80%, right? Right now, it looks like everyone parks on the street. So, you know, again, when you have two new restaurants opening up on the 100 block of Northampton Street, one that's very popular, I know the one has valet service, but all you need is 10 vehicles or 15 or 20 vehicles to just gobble up the street parking there. So that's why we're bringing these issues up, especially because I guess, Crystal, you're telling me it's not residents. I can see an issue here where it is with residents, unless the residents are maybe they are more attuned to this dynamic where they know if they're moving downtown, I don't move my car on, you know, like what you said, like during
On a
festivals.
I mean, I don't think a festival that we plan. I don't think that we should be making parking decisions for the two big weekend festivals we have each year. Like, people have to make a plan to come in. There are shuttle options and things like that. In fact, I mean, I think there are probably ways to even encourage that more than we are now. I know there are some cities I've talked to that actually shut down the cities so that they're not having the highway backup. I know that's probably a nightmare with dealing with the state and everything else because of the different jurisdictions of the roads. But I mean, I don't think for the two festivals that we should be making decisions that way because it's always going to be a problem. So like, there's not going to be enough parking for even the people who come downtown for that festival. So just like Music Fest buses people in.
Oh yeah. Madison, can you go back to that first slide? Madison, you there?
I mean, I think the other challenge is too, like, that we don't have we don't have other parking facilities like garages in those blues, in that, like, in the blue zone quadrant where I'm at.
Correct.
So, I mean, I think some of my neighbors' fears, I will say, is when I came to speak to council during the pandemic, when council was, I guess, or had thrown out the idea of possibly grandfathering in people to the residential permits. And, you know, like, you have people, like, who have been there way longer than me, and I've been there 10 years, but I get it. Like, I bought a house that had no CO, I put all my money into it, and then the idea that my parking passes could be stripped away if I ever have to sell the property.
Oh yeah.
It's a fear because there's then we are going to the private parking lots that are likely going to jack up the price of parking. They're already up to like $130, $140 a month for a private spot. That's a lot of money.
I don't think we're there. Like, we haven't, like, no one is thinking that internally.
I'm just bubbling up. That's
Yeah.
something that people fear because a lot of us had to come out to speak against that idea. I know it wasn't. I don't know.
They're speaking. I was at the planning commission meeting, and the people who were speaking against parking didn't understand that we've done everything we can do within the ordinance that's written. That we eliminated any building over 6 units. Because we worried about the bookends into Seville. I mean, they're not allowed to get it anymore. I mean, so we saw that. So what happens is, and the same people arguing that we shouldn't be giving them 240 spaces here, didn't understand that once we contract, we now have a written contract. Once we contract out all our spaces, this guy, the Benners, this project here, that's dead. There's no space. Because once that project's built and the hotel's built, there's no more spaces left in our parking
We
lot.
have no space left to give, and we still we need the space. We do need spaces in the garage. I mean, we don't know. I think we need another parking study. I'll be honest. And I read thank you for forwarding the last one, the Walker study, to me. But I would agree with you, Dr. Orgles. I think that there weren't enough data points that they looked at. It was something you brought up at the last meeting. And the city's already changed, but I think we don't know what our needs are going to be in 5-10 years. We can all make our own assumptions, but I don't think we have a study that supports that at this point.
The only thing is with Walker, I'll tell you, we are giving you in the last 2 weeks more data, more relevant data that Walker actually took a look at in terms of like utilization, because they made some major assumptions here. We didn't have the 4th Street garage, and we didn't have Da Vinci.
Right.
The other thing is with Walker, that's a reputable consulting company. We're going to see the same thing. The best kind of information that we have is right here. Like, we now have some data, and we can continue. And this is tedious, like, you know, as Mr. Pinnabone said. You know, we can continue to talk about this every month, and then we can show you the data, and then we can make adjustments. And we do have
a series of recommendations that we can make to help alleviate like some of the pain points here.
I mean, I am a fan of the cap. I think it's insane that you know, someone may have multiple vehicles or something like that, and they can use the program. Whereas, like, if I have more than 2 cars, one per person, like in the household, and I have an extra car that I'm driving on the weekend with the top down or something like that, I
have another car that's.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like then it would be my responsibility to find a private space somewhere for that. But like for my everyday car, I think that's reasonable to have a permit. And I'm not against possibly looking at the increased costs of more than one vehicle. I think the other thing is six apartments in one building, to cut it off at that. That's a pretty big apartment building. I think of a small apartment building as 2 units in a building.
We only did that only because Mr. Shear said we already have that with our trash.
It's something that we
It's
weren't
something already-
arbitrary on, is what he said.
It's arbitrary, and we are. I agree with you. We thought it would be 2, but it's 6 only because if you have over 6 units, you have to have private hauler.
I mean, I think what's the fear with that?
So
we would be open to litigation.
Right, the legal concern is if you, when you regulate things like this, you might have a disparate impact on, because renters typically are of lower socioeconomic status, not always, but oftentimes. And so if you have something that impacts renters more than owners, and you don't have a rational basis to what you're tying the limitation to, or some sort of other nexus that you're tying it to, it makes you more vulnerable to some sort of attack on the suit set of things. And since we already had that delineation between public trash versus private trash, it's like, well, it just makes it easier to tie it in. Well, so we have basically the city treats 6-unit or larger apartment buildings as a different category.
So we can't define buildings in different more than 2 categories at this point. A multi-unit.
We could look into doing that in the future if we wanted to refine it. It's just when we were doing this, we were acting with what we had, with the structure we kind of had
But
then.
so maybe we have to go back and dig further and come up with.
We can
other
always change,
categories.
yeah.
Correct. We could change it, but we'd want to make sure we're deliberate about how we make that
We have
selection.
good
I mean,
rationale.
I wouldn't just want to make the change
Right.
off the cuff without doing
But we
the
were-
proper research.
We were under a time crunch to get this ordinance in and passed because of all the development that was happening, and we wanted to make sure that the large developments couldn't get in and say, now we're grandfathered in.
Literally, the Seville is about to get their CO.
Right.
So we moved quickly and
Well,
kind of
that's
changed the
good.
ordinance.
I
As
have
quick
one-
as lawyers move.
Thank you. I have one other question, because I know there was an inventory at a point too, because I remember there were Governor Wolf renters, which are around the corner from me, who had parking spots and also had
Yep.
passes. So how many,
Wasn't
do
that
you
many,
know
right?
about how many,
But
or at some point, could we look at how many permits were rescinded because of that?
Well,
after
there was
looking-
never, that's a good question. There were never any passes that were
Right.
rescinded. They were grandfathered in, so to speak. But when there was turnover, when there was time for renewal, or not renewal, when there was turnover, so someone came in and took over the lease or bought a condo, right, in a multi-unit building, they would not be eligible for an on-street parking pass. They would have to go into the garage.
Okay. Yeah, because that development already, for example, have dedicated parking for
Right.
the tenants.
Yeah.
Do you know it's the address for the Governor Wolf building? Second Street, right? Obviously.
Yeah, second.
You got it.
That'd be
45 North Second Street?
45 North Second, I just got it.
All right, well, right now, we're showing 0 passes.
Okay, well, that's good.
They have 49 units.
There's a park now.
But to give you an idea here, 16 Center Square, which one's that?
Is that right here?
Yeah, so that one has 49 units, and it looks like 22 were grandfathered in. So they could be in the red zone. 103 3rd Street, 43 units, 42 passes. So there's still some considerable, and then I can keep going down. Actually, those are the largest. The rest, there's a couple 12s, and then the rest go then 2, and then it goes to 0.
I mean, if we want to, we could try to give some kind of incentive to have them park in a garage at a lower rate.
So I just want to bring up, that's a good question that you asked, Crystal. I'll send you this data, but and it's important that you all are in part of the conversation, because when we say who's managing the system, you're managing the system through the ordinance.
Mhm.
We're doing the day-to-day. So you have to, we're both involved here. So we haven't had this detailed of a discussion since probably Walker, all right, the Walker study. And even then, that was okay, you know. We gave them all the data. We knew the information. We just needed a third party to present it. That's really it. I don't think we should spend money on another study per se right now, unless we have unless we're going to bring in a major attraction and we need to really look at like the attraction's assumptions, like we did with Da Vinci, on what their potential attendance is going to be, right? That becomes a little bit more scientific, and then you're looking at feasibility studies. This, I think we can manage on our own before we need to go anywhere else. I do think that this data, the data that I'm showing you there, gives you an idea of where some recommendations can lie. The other thing is the idea of the garage versus on-street parking. I mean, do we try to move folks into the garage? But then what happens is once the garage continue to become more and more utilized, it's going to limit our usage for daily parkers. So dailies will either park on the street or not, or if they can't find parking, they won't come here.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that brings up on 4th Street too, I have had a couple people, I shared one of the messages with you, Louis, I think 2 weeks ago. The 4th Street garage, someone walked up to like the top 2 levels and it said it was full. And they were like, oh, I'm really surprised that it was a Saturday afternoon that it's full. And there were plenty of open spaces. So I don't know if that's something needs to be recalibrated.
I'll let Dave talk about that, because we were looking at numbers today. The 3rd Street garage was as expected. 4th Street garage is wacky, and I will tell you why. And the technology is not perfect, so cities are dealing with this same issues operationally. But I'll let Dave talk about that.
Thanks.
Is that on? Yeah. So that was a glitch, and we noticed.
Turn it down. It's too loud.
Where's the volume?
No, hers. Karen.
Oh.
City clerk will do it.
Oh, okay. So we did have a. I'm just going to turn.
That's fair.
Yep.
Yeah, but if somebody's sitting there to pay and it takes them 5 minutes, that's going to really cause some issues. Yeah.
I had an email today from a guy who used a 4th Street garage, and he wanted to know why it was only 2 hours. I said, because you're parked in the 2-hour parking.
And the first one.
I said, you go up to the upper levels, and you can park there forever. I don't care how long you park there. As long as you pay.
We are seeing some glitches on occasion. Now, I drive by those garages daily, like at least like maybe on Monday to Friday, like in the morning and afternoon, around lunch, just to see where we're at. And on occasion, I have to call Madison and say, hey, it's showing that we have we're almost full today. No, we're not full. So these are things that we're going through like right now, and we're just like updating. You're right. That and
Yeah, it's a new system, so I understand. Like it needs to be tweaked.
It's mostly the state theater, though.
What's that?
It is mostly the state theater.
Yeah, it's better than what we had before. It's giving us some data, and at least now we can talk.
And we won't know for sure until the Confluence and the Marquee are built.
Well, no,
Then we'll have experience.
Well, well, we have experience now, all right, and I'm comfortable with it. That like we have to. I'm just going to tell you, you just can't sit back think the on-street permit parking is another one.
That's
So
probably,
that's what we're trying to bring up.
that
here.
stupid mayor that did that back in the eighties, I'd kill him.
He was a friend of mine. Let him go.
Right. Dr. Ruggles.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dave's talking.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think one thing that's helpful is to think about our parking system that, as an asset and how you have to manage it is, we have 792 built spaces and we have 855 on-street public spaces available. So that's 1,647 spaces total. So we know the inventory and that's our capacity. And if you read a lot about parking and, we belong to various, industry, groups and, you have to decide what your target utilization is. For most parking facilities, to monetize it to the best you can, most of them recommend 70 or 80% utilization rate, which leaves, out of 792, you'd leave 20% of that for your transient parkers to come in. But that means that you're consciously saying that 20% of your facility will just go unutilized, and that's fine. We can make any decision we want for target utilization, but that's kind of how I believe you get a level of comfort and control over your system. Right now, on any given night, there's 450 to 500 empty spaces in the garages out of 792. That to me is not a good utilization, and even though it's not a money maker, we get $70 a month to pay for a space that generally costs about $35,000 to build per space in a parking facility. So if we can get that utilization up, and then your on-street utilization of 855, right now we're about 569 markets.
Yep.
So you're probably at like a high 60% utilization rate on the street. And most people say in your peak you want to be around 85, which leaves 15% of the spaces open at any given time.
Wait, go back. You said 60% on the street,
We're in the high 60s right now in utilization.
but that's when you look at all the meters.
That's when you look at all 855 in the
Okay, all
downtown.
right. I just because again, my point was Blue Zone is oversubscribed from a permit.
Right.
Okay.
But that's
Just
like
so okay.
sort of a micro issue within the
Yeah,
zone.
you're even looking at a higher level.
But
Okay,
but I
right.
just think it's helpful to know that here's a quantity of built parking and here's a quantity of public on-street parking. Here's how much we're taking up here and here's how much we're taking up here, and so the percentages work out. I know it's heresy to say, but we don't really have a parking capacity issue right now. And knowing where we're going, we're adding 200 spaces in the Marquesa, then we'll have 992 built spaces, and so technically we're adding like 41 garage parkers net after that, which would still leave us much lower than the targeted 70 or 80% that you'd want to be. It probably puts us highly utilized on the weekends, which most parking professionals will tell you you just cannot build for your peak. You have to build for your needs, and then you have to come up with like an innovative overflow policy to deal with your really peak times, and maybe that's a tram system that takes cars from Lehigh Drive and runs them in. It shows up every 5 minutes. It's convenient, and some people would probably choose to walk. It's not that far, but I think that's probably the way to head. Is let's figure out how we want to manage each system, what our target utilization is, and then I think right now trying to get some of the permits back into the garage is really important. That would balance us to a higher degree. I also think you could look at reducing the available parking to permit parkers right now in one zone or the other, especially on streets near the parking garage. So if you were to remove, that will not only open up your street spaces, but it could force people to go into the garage because our garage is very affordable.
Real quick thing there.
Well, when Crystal says $140 a month,
Yeah, when we talk
that
about
the
the
private
volume,
sector's getting.
Yeah.
What's going to add, I think, congestion is that we still have a set like vacancies, right? And on the 100, 200 block of Northampton Street, you start filling up those vacancies that are you're gonna see a lot more, visitors who are frequenting or who are going to those businesses, taking up spaces along Second Street.
Yeah,
in those
it will happen.
residential areas. And
Dr.
maybe
Oh.
daily. The one last thing that I wanted to bring up is that I don't know, I apologize. It's in a Walker study. That in addition to what we have in terms of our parking, the public parking on street and off street, the private sector also has about 1,500 spaces. That's interesting.
It is
That's interesting. And in talking to what's his name, who does internet advertising, I think I'm
Cliff Ross.
Cliff Ross. I said, Cliff, you did a nice video, and he was very receptive. He said, I know you're targeting the restaurants, but you should also be targeting the 1,500 spaces for maybe you should get their marketing business because they're not really marketing those spaces, or maybe they're not utilizing them as best they can, and maybe they need a partner like the city. So he said, oh, okay, that's a good idea. So, he went for it. It's just something that I wanted to bring up.
And that's based on some of the places talking about, like the church.
All of the
down
above.
here.
Yeah.
All the
That's actually a good fact that Walker brought up.
Yeah.
Walker, that was
They're unutilized.
Like they went out and did the reconnaissance and they gave us some decent data.
Just a couple things. One, I have a little bit of background as far as parking in some of the private locations, and there may be 1,500 there, but many of those are consumed by those entities allowing various agencies to park there for free. You know, like Project gets to park in St. John's lot. Siegel Museum gets to park in St. John's lot. So while those are 1,500 spaces, they're being consumed by people who are downtown. And if they were vacant, totally vacant, yes, but I don't know that all of those are available,
So
right?
now that that's good, and let's so let me clarify a little bit better. They're not. I didn't say. I don't think they're being utilized 100% of the time. That's true.
Mhm.
Even those spaces that you
Yeah.
told me, they're not utilized 100% of the time.
Yeah.
So there's a bandwidth there. It's not efficient.
Yeah.
The system is not.
Yeah. And I mean, and the other thing that you do need to realize for a lot, and especially churches, that there are times when those spaces are needed by the church. So if you have a funeral, okay, nobody can park here except people that are coming for the funeral, for example. You know, so there are those specific times that are like that.
I am thinking of 3 lots that are non-churches.
Yeah.
Church related, because you and I worked on the St. John's.
Yeah, yeah.
It didn't work out, but we tried. And there are 3 other lots. I'm not going to name.
I know what you're talking about.
There are 3 other lots that one of them is a social security building, which didn't work out.
Right.
But there's 2 other lots that equal maybe close to 100 spaces.
Well, you know, and we don't
One of
talk
them we're
about,
talking to.
we don't criticize former administrations when they made their decision. At the time, they didn't need that lot, so they gave it to them.
Yeah.
We own it, but they gave it to them.
But there is.
I mean,
there's
you
another
didn't
one.
need it.
There's another one right now that Councilman Dinnerbone's helping us. We're talking. We're going to hopefully talk to them. They're very interested in working with us. You know,
Yeah. I mean, I think if you talk to, this is my perception, but I think if you would talk to St. John's about putting maybe city cars over there, you know, overnight, I think that they would be receptive to that, you know.
Right now we're okay, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
In the future, but
Because, I mean, they're not gonna have a funeral overnight, right? So, you know, that lot is open 100% at night, I can tell you that, you know.
The other thing is the private sector figures it out. Time
Yeah.
doesn't have any parking.
that's right.
They got valet and they park there. They're paying Perucci to park there. They're charging $5. I mean, the private sector will figure it out.
Mayor, listen, it's election night. This is as much as I wanted to give information.
I just have one more thing that I would like to bring up. You need to close your ears so you don't hear this, okay? But you mentioned history before, okay? And it's my perception that people who live downtown remember back when, man, I come down here, I can park anywhere I want, you know? And as we get more and more parkers on the street, more and more residents downtown, it's becoming different than what they were used to. I was in Brooklyn today. There are 0 parking spots on the street. I drove around for, 15 minutes just trying to find a parking spot on the street. I can't tell you how many blocks I covered, and it was just wall-to-wall cars up and down all of the streets. And, those people are used to that. They're, that's the way things are, And I think to some extent we have to, I'm not saying that we don't work on the parking problem, but I think to some extent we have to recognize we're changing. And because we're changing, it's not going to be like it was, And so what target are we shooting for here?
Well, my comment to that is we need to be like Brooklyn per se, like on how we are aggressive managing the system.
Right.
We need to manage the system.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you, yeah.
I don't want to tell you, like, we're from the Lehigh Valley, right? So we are who we are. We don't want to be Brooklyn.
Right.
But we have to get more sophisticated in how we manage the system.
I agree.
So that's where we're at. Anyway, I know it's a big night. Frank sent me like.
Not a big night for me. I'm not running.
I'm like a salmon.
Nobody up here is running.
Are the polls closed now?
Polls are
Yes.
closed.
8 o'clock.
8:06. Anybody else have anything?
Yeah, just one, Roger, another way to think about it is, your turnover on the street is generally for your businesses, right? So you really have sort of an adversarial relationship between the need for the businesses to turn their customers over and the need for residents to find a stable place
Yeah.
to park. And so, that's another balance you want to figure out. When people say, well, no one can park near my business, then you have to look at, well, are there resident permits that are clogging up the street? And so, ours is a tricky one.
Yeah, I think there's some things that we aren't considering here too. Like when the marquee opens up, for example, how many people are we going to have there? 300. They're going to have friends that come over. We're going to go to dinner. Where are their friends going to park? Our zoning code is based upon residents, not people who are visiting those residents. And so again, there's going to be more demand simply because they're there, because of, so-and-so's visiting, or, my friend is coming over for the day. They're going to have to park someplace, and how do we manage that? That's just going to be more of a demand than we currently have.
I'll tell you what, the mayor hit the nail on the head about the private sector, right? And the private sector, A, I think is going to figure it out. But B, the example that he gave with the Ferrucci lot, you know how many times we were told no? We were told no so many times that that's not a shared parking lot. No way, Jose. Like, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And guess what? Time moves in, and now they're valeting, they're putting their parkers there.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. Now, it's not that simple, right? But I do think that we're going to continue to solve this problem. I think the bigger problem, potentially right now, at least on paper, is the on-street permit parking. And I also think that we're capped, like the mayor said. We're getting pretty close. We have to check out the experience after these new projects come in and fill up the garages at night. I do think we're after the hotel. We have to wait. We have to potentially wait a little bit. Potentially. Jay brought up some interesting metrics, so we're going to continue to watch that. But when he says there's 400, 500 vacancies at night, we know soon there's going to be at least 200 plus parkers at night added to the system. So we have to. I think we're at that threshold. Anyway, Mayor, I don't want to. Sorry.
I would bring up one other thing that's very, very confidential. Very confidential.
We're still video. Why don't we adjourn, Mayor?
We'll adjourn and go into executive session. I didn't know we were still recording.
Like,
Very confidential, only to the people watching at home.
motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.